host that soldier, we're going to have a shot in honor of him and his remembrance. Now, the soldier I'm going to talk about tonight is the absolute opposite of the guy, the hero that I talked about last week. And last week I talked about Padre John Foote, Victoria Cross winner from August 1942 on Dieppe. And Padre Foote was a bear of a man. He was a quiet individual, mild-mannered, and his actions spoke for him, not his words. Well, the guy I'm going to talk about this week couldn't be further from that if you tried to find somebody like that. And he is Sergeant Ernest Smokey Smith. Smokey Smith was a legend in the Canadian Army and remains that way to this day, even though he passed away in August of 2005. Smokey was born just before World War I erupted in May of 1914. He was born in British Columbia, grew up to be a strapping lad, boisterous, bit of a scoundrel himself from time to time, did a variety of jobs, and joined the Canadian Forces, joining the Air Force right at the start of World War II, but then discovered with the Air Force, he wasn't going overseas, certainly not right away, and he wanted to get into action. So he got out of the Air Force and went and joined the Seaforth Islanders of Canada. This big strapping guy, wearing his kilt, was a proud member of the regiment and wanted to go to war. He deployed in 1940 to England with the regiment and spent the next 2.5 years there training, fighting, drinking, and these were all in his own words, and getting busted down from one rank after another when he got promoted. Went to Sicily on the 10th of July, 1943 with the regiment, went ashore at Pechino, fought through Sicily with the Seaforth Islanders of Canada, and obviously identified himself to everybody around him as an incredible soldier. Went across to mainland Italy to continue to fight up the boot and trying to destroy the Nazis' yoke on the poor people, the brutal pressure on the poor people of Italy. And on the night of 22 October 1944 at the Savio River, Smokey proved just how incredibly good a soldier he was, how much courage he actually did have, and how valorous he was, how much valor he had in the presence of the enemy. And on that night, he was part of an anti-tank crew who went across the river to establish a beachhead. Other vehicles and soldiers could not get across, and the Germans counterattacked very quickly with Panther tanks, with self-propelled guns, with dismounted infantry supported by machine gun fire and artillery. The tanks soon spotted where Smokey was with one member of his anti-tank team, Trooper Bennett, and started firing on them with machine guns and main gun from the tank. His buddy was badly wounded and could not move. Smokey grabbed a Piat, a projector infantry anti-tank, and handheld anti-tank spring-launched weapon, and it was very good against tanks, but you had to be really close to make sure you could strike them. And he got within 30 feet of one tank and fired and destroyed the tank. And as he said, I had to kill it with that first shot or else it would have killed me. Set it on fire. The other tanks were still bringing machine gun fire to bear, did not strike him. The infantry jumped off the burning tank and attacked, and he opened up with his Thompson submachine gun. He killed at least 4 of the enemy before the others broke and ran, and then used another Piat that he found in the ditch to knock out one of the self-propelled guns, which looks much like a tank, from a similar close distance, and then found more magazines full of ammunition for his Thompson submachine gun in the ditch and used those to fight off the infantry. As he said later in an interview, I was a really good shot with the Thompson submachine gun, and I wasn't there to take prisoners. I was there to kill the enemy. The attack went on, but the Germans were losing heart because every time they got close, Smokey would bring them under effective fire. And during that effective fire coming from the enemy, he picked up his buddy who was wounded badly and brought him back across the river and indeed saved his life. The commanding officer said after the attack, if the Germans had succeeded of taking out that bridgehead and getting it across the Savio and going south themselves, the entire Allied line in Italy might have been displaced, and it would have cost hundreds, if not thousands, of Allied casualties to reestablish the momentum to destroy the Nazis in Italy and return the Italians to some kind of freedom. And so the next morning, he signed off on a recommendation for the Victoria Cross for Smokey and sent it up the chain of command and decided that this incredible natural warrior, this fighter, this combatant, this natural leader should be promoted to the rank of Lance Corporal. So he brought him back into regimental headquarters, brought in 5 of his friends from across the regiment, because you've got to remember now, they had been together for more than 3 years, training and drinking and fighting, and now in combat for a significant period of time. They were very close. And in the presence of his 5 friends to witness it, he promoted Smokey to Lance Corporal. Smokey accepted the promotion, celebrated with his 5 buddies by getting extremely drunk throughout the afternoon and the evening. And later that night, under the influence of alcohol, obviously, he and his buddies got into a fight with a bunch of Canadians in the battle group on their left flank. Big ruckus. The next morning, the commanding officer got the word of what occurred, the description of what had gone on, and Smokey's part in it. He demoted him to private and sent him back to his unit. 3 weeks later, the commanding officer got a message saying the Victoria Cross had been approved for Smokey. This guy now was an official public hero of the British Empire, not just Canada. And so he decided to try once more. They were in roughly the same location along the Savio River. He brought Smokey back to regimental headquarters, only brought in 1 friend this time. The commanding officer had obviously learned a little bit, promoted Smokey to Lance Corporal because he was such a natural leader that he deserved that rank. Smokey accepted the promotion, celebrated with his 1 buddy by getting really drunk during the afternoon and early evening. And during the night, no fight this time, but he and his buddies stole a Jeep belonging to one of the other companies in the regiment and drove it into a ravine and broke it so badly it was left there till the war was over. The next morning, the commanding officer got word of what had occurred and demoted Smokey to private the 2nd time and sent him back into his unit. From the 22nd of October 1944 until the 10th of June 1945, the commanding officer promoted Smokey to Lance Corporal and demoted him to private 9 separate times. Finally, way back in 1945 in June, the regiment is in Holland, and the commanding officer is told to send Smokey to London, to Buckingham Palace, to receive the Victoria Cross from the hands of King George VI. Commanding officer had learned a lot by now of what Smokey was like and what he was prone to do, and so he wisened up. The night before Smokey was going to fly out, he threw him in jail just to have positive control of him. And the next morning, when Smokey got on the flight to fly into London to get his Victoria Cross, he was accompanied by the 2 largest policemen in 1st Canadian Army, whose job was to get him from the front lines to the front gates of Buckingham Palace without a detour to the nearest pub for a beer, because that's where Smokey would have gone. Smokey was the opposite of Padre John Foote in his behavior and how he lived his life. He was exactly like him in the incredible valor that he showed, that he demonstrated in the presence of the enemy in winning that Victoria Cross. And he continued to do that throughout every part of the war, despite being wounded several times and staying in the fight itself. He came back to Canada after, spent a short time as a civilian, rejoined the army, rued the day that he missed going to Korea to fight, because he said, I'm a soldier and soldiers fight, and stayed in the army through the late 60s. He was the nightmare of every single garrison or base commander, because Smokey didn't take orders well, and he admitted that himself. He was an incredible individual. I had the privilege to meet him in 2002, 2003, several times when he was at the National War Memorial for Remembrance Day parades. And I remember just being inspired by being in the presence of this incredible individual. Smokey died in August of 2005, as I mentioned, the year of the veteran. And even in death, he continued to serve his nation, because what he did was brought a focus that otherwise would not have occurred on our veterans and their families and the needs that they had and the appreciation that we needed to show them. That was absolutely incredible. And I decided to be a little bit of a orangutan, much like Smokey was, and try to emulate one of my heroes. I went to the Prime Minister. We had a plan for Smokey's funeral out in Vancouver. I went to the Prime Minister Paul Martin, and said, Prime Minister, we need to have a state funeral for Smokey. We need to bring him to Ottawa. He needs to lie in state, and we need to have an opportunity for the nation to pay their respects to him, and through him, every other man and woman who served and sacrificed for our great nation. Prime Minister Martin was a little reluctant. I found out after that he was a little insecure that we would bring Smokey's body to Ottawa. It would lie in state and people would not show up, and it would be embarrassing for Smokey and his incredible memory. And he said, I'll get some advice. Let me call you. 8 hours later, I'm back in the Prime Minister's office. He said, General, I've had some advice from the bureaucracy saying we should not do this. This is for governor generals, past governor generals, prime ministers, and past prime ministers. He said, what do you think? And I said, Prime Minister, in the Army, we call this commander's business. You've been offered an option. You've had advice which says there are several options. Now make your bloody mind up and give me an answer, please. And he looked at me silently for about 30 seconds. I thought maybe I'd gone too far. he looked at it, and then he said, General, we're going to do it. Now don't screw it up. And so we had Smokey's brought to Ottawa on the Canadian Forces Airbus. And one of the most incredible, impactful sights of my life that I remember was being in Parliament buildings when his coffin was brought in on the shoulders of the non-commissioned officers of his regiment in their dressed scarlet tunics and their kilts, and placed in that most holy of spots, if you will, from our perspective. And the nation waited to pay their respects. We had lineups of 4 to 6 hours of people wanting to come, not just soldiers and sailors and airmen and airwomen and special forces troopers, and not just prime ministers and politicians and governor generals and chief justice of the Supreme Court, but ordinary Canadians who wanted to come and simply say thank you. It was absolutely incredible and one of the most moving things of all. I talked to the pilot of the airplane who took his body back to Vancouver, and the call sign of the Airbus was Smokey 1. And I talked to him, and he said, sir, I came on the radio. We had a lineup in air traffic to get out of Ottawa. I came on the radio and said, hey, ground control, this is Smokey Tower. This is Smokey 1, looking for clearance to fly. Somebody came back on the radio and said, is this Smokey, as in Smokey, the Victoria Cross winner, our hero? And the pilot said, yes, it is. He said, stand by, sir. And the pilot said, I had immediate access to the runway to take off, and I had the straightest line flight to Vancouver that I've ever flown in my entire life. People right across Canada, where you least expect it, were paying their respects to our Victoria Cross hero. I flew to Vancouver for the funeral. I was an honorary pallbearer. And I'll tell you, one of the other lasting memories that I have is marching across next to the gun carriage, carrying his coffin, marching across on that beautiful sunny day, Burrard Street Bridge. And we had a guard of 100 soldiers in front with their bayonets flashing in the sun and their white gloves flashing as they swung their arms. We had a band in front. We had the gun carriage with Smokey in his coffin. We had a platoon of heroes saying farewell and appreciating a hero behind them, men and women who had won Star of Bravery, Medals of Bravery, who were there to pay their respects. Behind was another 100 soldier guard. And it was absolutely incredible. As we peaked on Burrard Street Bridge, 5 F-18s came screaming overhead very low and did the missing man formation. But what was most impactful were the thousands of people along the sides of the road. And as we slow marched past them, they were singing out, saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. It was absolutely incredible, really emotional, and actually it still affects me to this day. We did his funeral, participated in his funeral, said farewell to this incredible individual who had served his nation so well. And later days, he was then cremated, and his ashes were taken on HMCS Vancouver, that sailed from Vancouver and were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. As a last little indication of what kind of individual Smokey was, he had done okay for himself in life. He wasn't a rich man, but he was an affluent man. And there were more than 3,000 people, probably 4,000 people even, back at the Burrard Street Armory for the post-service reception and sort of to say farewell together as a group to Smokey. And what Smokey had written into his will was he wanted enough money at the bar out of his estate to pay for a drink for every single one of them. So we all toasted Smokey Smith, Victoria Cross, incredible hero of Canada, somebody who handed us, in fact, a torch. And I'll tell you simply this. When I was serving with the 100,000 of Canada's sons and daughters who served with me, and I know it's the same for those serving since, we knew that he had, figuratively speaking, handed us a torch to hold high. And every one of us, without doubt, we would have laid our lives down rather than figuratively drop that torch that he had handed to us and insulted he and his memory of valor and service to Canada. So if you have your shots available, and mine is a dirty, cheap rum tonight, and I'm sure Smokey would have appreciated that too. Here's to Smokey Smith, Victoria Cross winner, incredible Canadian son, and hero of our nation, Smokey Smith.
Smokey Smith.
Thank you.